film. It's really beautiful. It's both a loving tribute to Roger and to your marriage, your wonderful marriage with him. Was there anything both of you were surprised to find out that you didn't know about him before you shot the movie?
Well, I found out a lot of things, but why don't you start with what, because a lot less for her.
Yeah, when you're married, you have a thing, but there's still
she tended to know a little bit more about Roger than me.
There was something that I thought was quite moving and beautiful, and that was, I always knew how proud Roger was to be the editor of the Daily Illini when he was in college, and how seriously he took that role. What I didn't know is that his writing, even at that point, was so so focused and so socially sensitive. And when they talk about when those 4 little girls were killed in the bombing in the Birmingham church, and the stuff he said then, oh, it was so beautiful. And how could a man, a boy barely, man, that had the presence of mind to do something like that, to take it and shape it and take responsibility for it and take leadership in what was being printed. Also when, you know, the President Kennedy was assassinated, and the stuff that was on the opposite page, and he said, stop the presses, stop the presses. So that impressed me.
What did you find interesting about Roger? I always remember when I last saw him at the Toronto Film Festival, I went up to say hi, and he had his camera, and he was just sitting there. I'm like, this is an interesting shot. I wish I had a camera till this day, and I took that. It was always really nice and gracious to me. But I always wondered what his home life is like. Now I got a little chance to see it a little bit.
Chance to see it, and you see that it was very full. That's the thing that people, that I know surprised people, because they didn't know, because we kept that so private. We loved our home life. We loved being with the children and the grandchildren. We loved traveling. You know, from the time they were little babies, we'd bundle them up and take them off to Europe or take them somewhere. We'd rent villas and just relax, and you know, they would put on plays for us, and when they weren't with us, we would write letters to them so that they could get an actual letter with a stamp and envelope and know what that was all about. Everything. We just loved our family life together, and he was a great grandfather. So that was one of the things I found interesting about him, that he had a full life, that he wasn't just so focused on just himself. Because which would be understandable for a person who had lived his life so long without children, without being married. You know, he had dated, and some of his girlfriends had children, but to have the own personal responsibility of someone you call your own grandchild without first having children, I didn't know if he'd be able to you know, hack it. And he had so much love and so much. Our grandchildren transformed him. Probably as much as my love for him transformed him. So,
and that's what I was going to ask you about that. What did you like about Roger? What did you find interesting about him?
I found everything interesting about him. First of all, he was so smart. I love smart men. He was so smart. He was so interesting. He loved travel, as did I. We both read a lot. So right from the beginning, the first day, you know, that we were sitting there and we're talking, and it comes up in conversation. Every reference I would make, or every reference he would make, was a counter reference. It was like dot 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 dot. It was almost like playing, you know, tennis or ping pong, and you're hitting the ball back and forth, and neither one of us, the ball never dropped. We kept going back and forth with it, and we were like, you know, it's kind of interesting. So, and I also liked that he was so generous with people, and you know, he loved his fellow film critics, and he was really generous with them rather than being competitive, except that with Gene Siskel. Although there's some stories later with Gene Siskel. There was one time when you know, Gene's job was in peril, and Roger went to his newspaper to make a place for Gene just in case Gene lost his job. I had never known that. Just a lot of things. Also, I like the fact that he was so curious about other people, that he didn't want to be, you know, he said, we're born in this space and time, and we're kind of stuck there. Through movies, we can get out, and, you know, movies are a machine that generate empathy. Where did that come from? The fact of somebody wanting to empathize so much with a person of another race, of another age, of another gender, of another, sexual orientation. Where did that come from? Who learns that early? This is something I think, this is what we should teach in this society. I believe so firmly in that. And when I saw that and saw how passionately he believed in it, as did I just fell in love with him.
Steve, I've got to ask you about the nuts and bolts of creating this documentary. How did you go about determining your interview subjects, getting their cooperation, and then honing in, especially when Roger's health took a turn for the worst, to make the most of the limited time that you had as a filmmaker?
Yes, good questions. With the interview subjects, the first and foremost, my guide was the memoir. Roger devotes individual chapters to some of the most important people in his life. I mean, there's a Chaz chapter, but of course Chaz appears in lots of places in the book. But
As I should.
as she better. No. But we're getting a little giddy. But like other chapters, he had a chapter devoted to Bill Nack, his friend from college who recites Gatsby. He has a chapter devoted to John McHugh, his friend, his lifelong friend he made when he first came to Chicago and was a fellow reporter. He has a chapter devoted to Herzog and to Scorsese. And in both cases, with Scorsese, it's a bit more about the friendship than with Herzog, because he was closer to Scorsese. Mm-hmm. But with both, it was about what it was about their movies and their body of work that so spoke to him, that inspired him. And so that was a great guide. And, I had this initial idea, and it wasn't out of laziness, I like to say, that I was going to interview like 8 people, period. Chaz would be one, John McHugh, Bill Nack, a producer from the show, Martin Scorsese, like Herzog, and then, one other, that was it. Only 8 people. But once I got into it, it was like, it's impossible. I mean, you could interview 100 easily. I didn't want to do that. But I just found as I got into it that I just felt like I needed to have other voices. I needed to have other filmmakers, and not confine myself to the ones that get chapters devoted to them. But that was a key thing in deciding who to interview. And then the candor really, I mean, some of these folks would have consented to interviews without Roger and Chaz saying, please be a part of it. But many of them would not have. They really wanted permission to speak, and not only did they give them permission to speak, but Roger and Chaz said, please be candid, please be honest. One of the biggest coup interviews, I think, in the whole movie was Marlene, Gene's wife, because she had never spoken publicly. She's a very private person, just like Gene was in many respects, despite his being on the show. He was by nature a very private kind of person, especially.
She has kind of a fear of public speaking.
And fear of public speaking, yes. And so, but she agreed to be a part of it. I just found this out this week. She first asked Roger and Gene if they approved.
No, Chaz.
Oh, just asked Chaz.
Gene was gone.
Yeah, I meant Roger and Chaz. Yes, sorry. If they approved, which I didn't even know. I thought it was just my persuasive charms that got her to agree to do it, but she had to burst my bubble on that. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, her voice in this is so important to this movie because she's the one who, I mean, there are other critical voices, but she's one of the most critical of Roger, kind of from Gene's perspective, as well as her own. But she also kind of shows the way in which Roger changed, and in terms of her changing view of him. I thought that was so crucial to film. So the last part of your question was about...
And how did the turn in Roger's
yes.
illness impact your plans and the actual filming? Because obviously when you were going to go in and start shooting parties and out and about events, and now you got a hospital room.
Right, hospital and then rehab room, and they basically are interchangeable to the... in a lot of ways. I mean, really for several months there, we kept thinking that he was going to come home. you know, I mean, I was initially, that was a surprise, oh, we're not going to be filming that, he's going to be in the hospital, but I remember Chaz either telling me or emailing me, I think 2 or 3 weeks and he'll be back. And I was like, there was part of me that was like, well, that's fine. In fact, it's probably good to see him in that kind of recovery rehab setting, because I knew he had gone through that a lot in his previous years, so that would be a visual that I could use to kind of talk about that. But always expecting that it's just a little pit stop and then he'd be back doing all those things we wanted to film, and of course they never happened. And so, but the strange thing in all this is that it wasn't until near the very end that I had a sense that he really might not, even once the cancer diagnosis came, it certainly crossed my mind, as he says in the film, I won't be alive when the film's done. But I wasn't so sure about that, because, in part because Chaz was very confident that he was going to be around for a while, and her track record on that score was pretty good. She had, you know, she had pulled him back from the grave several times already. So when she said, I think he's going to, you know, we're going to get through this and he's going to, you know, be fine, I was right there with her. But so it really wasn't until near the end when his energy started to decline, and I remember having some conversations with Chaz about where I heard much more concern in her voice about where things were headed, that reality became. But I think the impact on the film is that, of course, it made the film not just about how you live your life with this tremendous burden of disabilities and the two of them together with his. It also became a film about how you die, and how you do it with such grace and dignity and sense of humor intact, and kind of, you know, that was extraordinary. I thought it was extraordinary that he had all those qualities without it being the last months of his life. The fact that it ended up being the last months of his life just made it all the more extraordinary.
I think it's probably hard for you to put into words, but what has it meant to you all these years to know so many people had such an emotional connection to Roger and his work and his life? I mean, does that make you feel like
It is so beautiful and so overwhelming that it moves me to tears. When I go around the country and I hear, and everybody has a story, and not just a superficial story, but something, and you can see that people actually are touched. I think that he communicated with people from his heart, and he was also very smart. So I would say that he when he communicated and when he wrote, he did it with both brain and heart firmly engaged simultaneously. And so he was a connector and a communicator, and I am touched profoundly by how many people tell me that either watching the show or reading his writing or meeting him or just knowing about his philosophy of things meant something to them. I did not expect that. So.
I started this, I remember when I ran my video stores, going back to 1991, I used to have all the talent, all the celebrities. I remember Chris Penn coming into the store and saying, you're good at getting people to watch the movies that are good for them after a long 9-to-5 day. I'm like, that's because I was watching them out of Chicago. So I started my show because of that when I came back from Australia. So it was because of Roger, not Gene, Roger, that I did that. And me and my co-host, till this day, we've been together for 20 years, but I've been doing it for a total of 28 years.
Oh my gosh.
And it's because of him. So when I finally met him, I was honored by that. And I never got a chance to tell him afterwards because I was traveling to other film festivals. I was trying to get each one while I had the opportunity. And I never reached out to you because I felt you guys kind of kept everything private, and I was obviously it was right. So
but your stories is perfect. You know, you've heard
multiplied.
You've heard, and Chaz, I know you've heard these stories like, you know, 100-fold more than I do over the years. I've only been hearing them since I've been working on the film, you know, and then subsequently since the film's done, and it is remarkable. And it's why all you guys are around this table, and we just came from a table full of people, and there was probably another table full waiting right now. But
and I have to tell you, in the beginning, they really thought, I mean, it's a documentary, and you know how it's we thought, okay, it'll open in just maybe 2 theaters in the beginning or something, and now I think it's up to, within a 2-week period, 40 and 50.
or 50.
And I hear that they're selling it internationally. which, you know, there's something more to this. I call it magic. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the intangible thing is that Roger had and that he brought to this world with him. I just call it magic. I don't know what it is. So
I thought you called it Rogerness.
his Rogerness, well, he.
And I just have a very quick question. I'm just wondering where you get your strength from. Was that something you learned from your family, or is it something that you just learned over the years because you have unbelievable strength?
It is, you know, when I have to give a short answer, I just say from love, because I loved him so much. But it is more complicated than that. I grew up in a family where I was so supremely loved, and I felt so secure in that love that it gave me a capacity to develop. I have a tremendous capacity for love. Some of it I learned from my family, some of it I learned from my faith, some of it it actually grew when I had to take care of him when he was so sick. And it was so strict that we used to communicate with each other like with mental telepathy. And it just, my capacity for compassion and tolerance and patience, I am so glad that I learned that, and I learned it from taking care of him. But initially it was from my family background. 4 brothers and 4 sisters who you have to battle with all the time. You know, a mother who I know, my mother was like this. She was the kind of, I had 4 brothers and 4 sisters. There were 9 of us. Each one of us thought we were the favorite person in that family, because that's how my mother treated us. When we would come into a room, she would light up, and when she came into a room, she brought the sunshine with her. When you have somebody like that who loves you so much, and that's why I love kids and why I love doing things to let kids know that they are valued and loved, because it takes you through your whole life. Conversely, a lot of kids are so, you know, either battered or bruised or neglected, and when they're doing that, you can stop that. But that's also something that you're tempted to take through your life until someone intervenes and says, no, you are loved and you are valued. So
I don't know what he ever saw in you, but